The bitter January wind whipped across the industrial district of Cleveland as 47-year-old Margaret Sullivan hurried toward the entrance of Sullivan Manufacturing, the mid-sized factory where she had worked as a production line supervisor for 18 years. At 5:30 a.m., the parking lot was already filling with workers starting the early shift, their breath visible in the frigid air as they rushed to escape the cold. Margaret had been with the company since she was 29, working her way up from entry-level assembly to her current supervisory position through dedication, overtime hours, and a reputation for fairness that made her popular with both management and workers. The job had allowed her to raise her son Daniel as a single mother after her husband's death in a car accident 12 years earlier. Morning, Mrs. Sullivan called out Carlos Rodriguez, one of the machinists on her line. Heard we're getting a new janitor today. Really? What happened to Jim? Retired finally. Poor guy's been talking about it for 3 years. Margaret nodded as she headed toward the supervisor's office to review the day's production schedule. Sullivan Manufacturing produced automotive components, and their Cleveland facility employed about 300 people in a region where good manufacturing jobs had become increasingly scarce. As Margaret settled into her routine of checking overnight reports and preparing for the morning shift meeting, she noticed a young man in a janitor's uniform emptying trash cans near the production floor. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair and an athletic build that seemed somewhat unusual for janitorial work. "You must be the new janitor," Margaret said, approaching him with the welcoming manner she used with all new employees. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, line supervisor for this section." The young man looked up from his work, and Margaret was struck by his intelligent eyes and professional demeanor. "Yes, ma'am. Danny Martinez, first day on the job. Well, welcome to Sullivan Manufacturing, Danny. If you have any questions about procedures or need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. I appreciate that." Margaret noticed that Danny spoke with excellent grammar and carried himself with more confidence than most new employees, but she had learned not to make assumptions about people's backgrounds. In the current economy, she had seen college graduates take any available work, and she always treated every employee with respect regardless of their position. What Margaret didn't know was that Danny Martinez was actually Daniel Sullivan, her own son, who had graduated from Case Western Reserve University with an MBA 2 years earlier and had secretly inherited Sullivan Manufacturing from his grandfather. 6 months ago, Daniel had made the decision to work undercover in his own factory for several reasons. First, he wanted to understand the daily operations from the ground up before implementing any changes as the new owner. Second, he was concerned about reports of declining morale and potential labor issues that weren't reaching management. And third, he wanted to see how his mother was treated in her workplace, knowing that any favoritism or problems might not be reported to him directly. Danny called out Tom Bradley, the plant manager, approaching with a clipboard. "How are you settling in?" "Just fine, sir. Mrs. Sullivan here was welcoming me to the team." Tom nodded approvingly. "Margaret's one of our best supervisors. Been with the company longer than anyone except maybe me. Her son just finished his MBA, you know. Real proud of him." Daniel felt an uncomfortable mixture of pride and guilt hearing his accomplishments discussed, while standing in disguise next to his unknowing mother. "That's wonderful," Daniel replied. "Education is important." "Sure is. Though between you and me," Tom lowered his voice, "we're hoping he doesn't get too educated to remember where he came from. Margaret's worked hard to give him opportunities, and it would be a shame if he forgot that." Margaret felt a familiar warmth when her son was mentioned, mixed with the concern that had been growing since Daniel's graduation. Despite her pride in his achievements, she worried that his MBA and job prospects in corporate management might take him far from Cleveland and the working-class values she had tried to instill in him. "I'm sure he's a good young man," Daniel said carefully. "Most people don't forget the sacrifices their parents made for them." As the morning progressed, Daniel observed the factory operations with the dual perspective of a trained business analyst and a son watching his mother at work. He was impressed by Margaret's competence and leadership style. She managed her team with firm but fair expectations, solved problems efficiently, and clearly cared about both productivity and worker welfare. But he also noticed things that concerned him. The equipment was older than optimal for efficiency. Several workers mentioned being stretched thin due to understaffing, and there were signs that cost-cutting measures had been affecting quality and morale. During the lunch break, Daniel found himself eating in the employee cafeteria next to his mother, maintaining his cover while trying to learn more about the workforce's concerns. "How are you finding the work so far?" Margaret asked, genuinely interested in the new employee's adjustment. "It's honest work," Daniel replied, "though I notice people seem a bit stressed lately." Margaret sighed. There have been rumors about potential layoffs. The new owner, old Mr. Sullivan's grandson, took over a few months ago, and nobody's met him yet. People are worried he might sell the company or move operations somewhere cheaper. Daniel felt a stab of guilt, his decision to remain anonymous, while he learned the business had clearly created anxiety among the workers who depended on their jobs. "What do you think about it?" Daniel asked. "I think people work better when they know what to expect. Uncertainty makes everyone nervous, and nervous workers make mistakes." Margaret paused, then added, "I just hope whoever is running things now understands that this isn't just a business, it's people's lives and livelihoods." "And if the new owner doesn't understand that?" Margaret's expression grew determined. "Then those of us who've been here a while will have to help him learn." Sometimes people in management positions need to be reminded that every decision affects real families, not just numbers on a spreadsheet. Daniel realized that his mother was essentially talking about him, her own son, without knowing it. Her words carried both wisdom and a challenge that made him understand that his undercover investigation was about to become much more complicated than he had anticipated. As the afternoon shift began, Daniel continued his janitorial duties while mentally cataloging everything he observed about operations, worker satisfaction, and the management challenges facing the company he now owned. But increasingly, his focus was drawn to his mother's leadership and the respect she clearly commanded among her colleagues. The question that was beginning to form in his mind was whether his business education had prepared him to run the company better than the experienced workers who had been keeping it running successfully for years. That question would become even more urgent when circumstances forced him to reveal his true identity much sooner than he had planned. 2 weeks into Daniel's undercover operation, tensions at Sullivan Manufacturing had escalated to a breaking point. Rumors of potential layoffs had spread throughout the facility. Productivity was declining due to worker anxiety, and several key employees had begun looking for other jobs. Margaret found herself in the difficult position of trying to maintain morale among her team while having no official information about the company's future. During the morning shift meeting, the stress was evident in every supervisor's face. "Look," said Jana Williams, supervisor of the packaging department, "my people are asking direct questions about job security, and I don't have answers. Some of our best workers are updating their resumes." Tom Bradley, the plant manager, looked exhausted. "I've tried to reach the new owner multiple times, but all communication goes through lawyers and accountants. It's like he doesn't want to deal with the actual business operations." Margaret felt frustration building. "Tom, we need to do something. Good workers are going to start leaving, and then we'll have real problems." "What do you suggest, Margaret?" "I suggest the new owner gets down here and sees what he's actually responsible for. These aren't just employee numbers, these are people who've dedicated years of their lives to keeping this company profitable." Unknown to Margaret, Daniel was cleaning the conference room next door and could hear every word of the conversation. The guilt he had been feeling since starting his undercover investigation intensified as he realized how much his absence and secrecy were affecting the workforce. That afternoon, the situation came to a head when Maria Santos, one of Margaret's most reliable workers, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice." Margaret felt her heart sink. Maria had been with the company for 8 years and was one of the most skilled operators on the line. "Maria, what's wrong?" "My husband found a job in Columbus. With all the uncertainty here, We can't afford to wait and see what happens. We have 3 kids, and we need stability." Margaret understood the logic, but felt frustrated by the circumstances. "Maria, you know how much we value your work here." "I know, Mrs. Sullivan. But you can't guarantee that I'll still have a job next month, can you?" Margaret had to admit that she couldn't provide that assurance. As Maria walked away, Margaret felt anger building, not at Maria for making a sensible decision, but at the invisible owner who was allowing uncertainty to destroy the team she had worked years to build. Daniel, who had been maintaining the cleaning equipment nearby, overheard the entire conversation. Seeing his mother's frustration and Maria's difficult decision made him realize that his careful approach to understanding the business was causing real harm to real people. During his lunch break, Daniel called the law firm handling his affairs and instructed them to arrange an immediate meeting with plant management. It was time to end his undercover investigation and take direct responsibility for the company's operations. But before he could reveal his identity officially, an incident occurred that forced his hand much sooner than planned. That afternoon, a mechanical failure on one of the aging production machines created a potentially dangerous situation. A hydraulic line burst, sending high-pressure fluid across the work area and forcing an immediate evacuation of Margaret's section. Margaret was coordinating the emergency response when she noticed that one of her workers, elderly Frank Rodriguez, had been caught in the spray and was having difficulty breathing. Without hesitation, she ran back into the dangerous area to help Frank to safety, despite the risk of injury from the pressurized equipment. Daniel, working in the adjacent area, saw his mother put herself in danger and acted on pure instinct. Dropping his janitor's persona completely, he rushed to help, using emergency shutdown procedures that no janitor should have known, and taking charge of the situation with an authority that surprised everyone present. "Tom," Daniel called out to the plant manager, "get the emergency medical team here now and shut down the main hydraulic system. The emergency controls are in the electrical room." Tom Bradley stared at the young janitor, who was suddenly giving orders with detailed knowledge of the facility's systems. "How do you know about the emergency controls?" Daniel realized he had blown his cover, but with his mother potentially injured and Frank needing immediate medical attention, maintaining his disguise was no longer important. "Because I'm Daniel Sullivan," he said, helping Margaret support Frank as they moved him toward the exit. "I own this company, and right now, that's all that matters." The work area fell silent except for the hiss of escaping hydraulic fluid. Margaret stared at the young man she had known as Danny Martinez, trying to process what she had just heard. "You're Daniel Sullivan," Margaret repeated slowly. "Yes, ma'am, and you're my mother." The workers who had gathered to help with the emergency looked back and forth between Margaret and the man they had known as the new janitor, confusion evident on their faces. "Your mother?" Frank Rodriguez asked weakly, still recovering from his exposure to the hydraulic fluid. "Margaret Sullivan is my mother," Daniel explained, keeping his arm around Frank to support him. "I've been working here undercover for 2 weeks to understand how the company really operates." Margaret felt a mixture of emotions: pride that her son had revealed himself to help in an emergency, confusion about his deception, and anger about the anxiety his secrecy had caused. "We'll discuss this later," Margaret said firmly. "Right now, let's get Frank to the medical station and make sure this area is safe." As the emergency medical team arrived and began treating Frank for mild chemical exposure, Daniel found himself facing a room full of workers who now knew that their mysterious new owner had been working among them, observing their concerns and hearing their frustrations firsthand. Tom Bradley approached Daniel with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Mr. Sullivan, I think we need to have a serious conversation about the future of this company." "Yes, we do," Daniel agreed. "But first, I need to talk to my mother." As the immediate crisis was resolved and the work area was secured for repairs, Daniel realized that his carefully planned investigation had been replaced by the need for immediate, honest communication with the people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. The conversation with his mother would be the most important of his life, and it would determine not just their personal relationship, but the future of Sullivan Manufacturing and everyone who worked there. An hour after the hydraulic incident, Margaret and Daniel sat across from each other in the plant manager's office. The door closed against the curious eyes of workers who were still processing the revelation that their new janitor was actually the company owner. Margaret studied her son's face, seeing past the janitor's uniform to the young man she had raised, but also recognizing a stranger who had deceived her for 2 weeks, while she worried about job security and company stability. 25 years old, Margaret said finally, her voice controlled but tense. MBA from Case Western, owner of a company with 300 employees. And you thought the best way to run your business was to mop floors and empty trash cans? Daniel shifted uncomfortably under his mother's direct gaze. Mom, I needed to understand. You needed to understand what? Exactly. Whether your own mother was competent at her job, whether the workers you inherited were trustworthy, whether the company your grandfather built was worth your time and attention. It wasn't like that. Then explain to me what it was like. Daniel, explain to me why you let me stress about layoffs and budget cuts while you were pretending to be someone else in my workplace. Daniel took a deep breath. I wanted to see how the company really operated without the filter of management reports. I wanted to understand what workers actually experience, not just what gets reported up the chain of command. And what did you learn? I learned that this company succeeds because of people like you supervisors who care about both productivity and worker welfare. I learned that the equipment needs upgrading, that we're understaffed in key areas, and that good people are leaving because they're afraid of an owner they've never met. Margaret's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. And you couldn't have learned those things by walking through the plant and talking to people. Honestly, I thought people would tell me what they thought I wanted to hear if they knew I was the owner. So instead, you decided to spy on us. Daniel winced at the word spy, but he couldn't deny its accuracy. I was trying to be responsible. Grandpa left me a company with 300 jobs and their families depending on the decisions I make. I wanted to make sure I understood what I was responsible for. Margaret stood up and walked to the window overlooking the production floor, where workers were cleaning up from the hydraulic incident and preparing to resume operations. Daniel, look out there. What do you see? Daniel joined her at the window. I see people getting back to work after an emergency. I see Frank Rodriguez, who's worked here for 22 years and has 2 grandchildren he's helping put through college. I see Maria Santos, who just gave her notice because she can't afford to wait for an owner who won't communicate with his employees. I see Jana Williams, who's been covering extra shifts because we're short-staffed and she doesn't want production to suffer. Daniel felt the weight of his mother's words. These people don't need a boss who spies on them, Margaret continued. They need a leader who trusts them enough to ask for their input and who cares enough to give them straight answers about the company's future. You're right, Daniel admitted. But Mom, I also learned something else during these 2 weeks. What's that? I learned that you're the best supervisor in this plant and probably the most respected person in the company. I learned that workers come to you with problems because they trust your judgment. And I learned that you've been essentially running this operation with minimal support from upper management. Margaret turned to face her son. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been thinking about this company's leadership structure all wrong. I've been assuming that my MBA and ownership gave me the qualifications to run Sullivan Manufacturing. But watching you work, seeing how you solve problems and lead people, I think I need to learn from you, not just observe you. Daniel, you own the company. The responsibility is ultimately yours. Ownership and leadership aren't the same thing. I own the company, but I don't know how to lead it yet. You do. Margaret sat back down, processing this unexpected turn in their conversation. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that I stop pretending to know what I'm doing and start learning from the people who actually do know, starting with you and the day-to-day operations. I want you to consider becoming the plant operations manager, not just a line supervisor, but the person responsible for coordinating all production activities. You'd work directly with me on strategic decisions, but you'd have the authority to implement changes and manage daily operations. Margaret stared at her son. You're offering me a promotion? I'm offering you the position you've already been doing unofficially, with the title and authority to do it properly. And what would you do? I'd focus on the business side, finances, marketing, strategic planning, equipment upgrades. But I'd make those decisions based on input from you and the other experienced workers, not on theoretical business models. Margaret was quiet for several minutes, considering the implications of her son's proposal. Finally, she spoke. Daniel, there's something you need to understand. These workers don't just need job security, they need to know that their experience and knowledge are valued. They need to feel like partners in the company's success, not just employees. How do we accomplish that? We start by being honest with them. No more disguises, no more mystery owners. You meet with the entire workforce, explain your vision for the company, and ask for their input on how to achieve it. Daniel nodded. And then you prove that you mean what you say by implementing their suggestions and sharing the benefits when the company succeeds. What kind of benefits? Margaret smiled for the first time since learning her son's identity. Profit sharing, education assistance, equipment upgrades that make their jobs safer and more efficient. You show them that when Sullivan Manufacturing succeeds, everyone succeeds. As mother and son continued their conversation, they began to outline a new approach to running the company, one that combined Daniel's business education with Margaret's operational experience and the workforce's practical knowledge. But the real test would come when Daniel faced the entire workforce and had to convince 300 skeptical employees that the young man, who had been emptying their trash cans, was ready to lead their company into the future. The confrontation with his mother had been difficult, but the conversation with his employees would determine whether Sullivan Manufacturing could become the kind of company that both honored its past and embraced its future. 3 months after Daniel's revelation, Sullivan Manufacturing was buzzing with energy that hadn't been felt in the facility for years. The all-hands meeting where Daniel had revealed his identity and outlined his vision for the company had been just the beginning of a transformation that surprised even the most optimistic employees. Margaret stood in her new office, formerly a storage room, that had been converted into the operations manager's headquarters, reviewing production reports that showed record efficiency and the lowest turnover rate in the company's history. "Mom," Daniel called out as he approached her office, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the work clothes that had become his regular attire since abandoning executive suits in favor of spending time on the production floor. "How did the equipment inspection go?" Margaret asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Better than expected. The new hydraulic systems should be installed next week, and the workers on line 3 had some excellent suggestions for improving the workflow during the upgrade." Margaret smiled. Frank Rodriguez's suggestion about the temporary routing. Exactly. He knows those machines better than the engineers who designed them. This had become the pattern over the past months. Daniel would identify needs and resources, while Margaret and the experienced workers would develop practical solutions. The partnership had exceeded both their expectations and had created a model of collaborative management that was attracting attention from other manufacturing companies. "Speaking of Frank," Margaret said, "he wanted me to thank you again for the education fund contribution." Daniel had established a program that provided college tuition assistance for employees' children, starting with Frank's grandson, who was studying engineering at Cleveland State. The fund was already supporting 12 students, with more applications coming in each month. "It's an investment in our future," Daniel replied. "Some of those kids will probably come back to work here with new ideas and skills." And the profit-sharing announcement. Board approved it yesterday. Every employee will receive a bonus based on their years of service and our quarterly performance. Frank's bonus should cover his grandson's textbooks for the entire semester. Margaret felt pride swell in her chest as she watched her son discuss the business with the enthusiasm and knowledge that came from genuine understanding of what made the company successful. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret the MBA program? All that time studying business theory when you could have been learning the practical side." Daniel considered the question seriously. The MBA gave me the language to communicate with banks, investors, and corporate partners. But working on the floor with you and the team taught me what actually matters in business. The people who make it work, and your undercover investigation. I regret the deception and the anxiety it caused, but I don't regret learning what it's like to be an employee rather than an owner. It gave me perspective I couldn't have gotten any other way. Their conversation was interrupted by Tom Bradley, who knocked on the open door with obvious excitement. "Margaret, Daniel, you need to see this," Tom said, holding up a letter with official letterhead. "What is it?" Margaret asked. "The Ohio Manufacturing Association wants to feature Sullivan Manufacturing in their annual report as a model for innovative labor management partnerships. They're particularly interested in our collaborative decision-making, process and profit-sharing program." Daniel looked at his mother with genuine surprise. "We're being recognized for innovation? Apparently, what we think of as common sense is revolutionary in corporate America." Margaret replied with amusement. "There's more," Tom continued. "3 other companies have contacted us about consulting on similar programs. They want to know how we've achieved our productivity improvements while increasing worker satisfaction." Daniel felt a mixture of pride and irony. His decision to work as a janitor to understand his own business had evolved into a management philosophy that other companies wanted to emulate. "What do you think, Mom? Are we ready to teach other companies how to treat their workers like partners?" Margaret's expression grew thoughtful. "I think we're ready to share what we've learned, but only if we can do it without compromising our focus on our own people." "What do you mean?" "I mean that if we start consulting for other companies, we need to make sure it benefits our workers too. Maybe we can offer some of our experienced supervisors opportunities to train managers at other facilities with additional compensation for their expertise." Daniel grinned. "You're thinking about expanding our educational programs beyond just college tuition." "I'm thinking about creating opportunities for our people to grow professionally while sharing their knowledge." Frank Rodriguez could teach hydraulic systems to supervisors at other plants. Jana Williams could train packaging managers. Our workers could become educators and consultants themselves. "That's brilliant," Daniel said. "We could create a whole new revenue stream while giving our employees additional career opportunities." As they discussed the possibilities, Margaret reflected on how much had changed since that day when she had discovered that the new janitor was actually her son. The discovery had been shocking and initially hurtful, but it had led to a partnership that was transforming not just their company, but their relationship as mother and son. "Daniel," Margaret said as their meeting wound down, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you, not just for your business success, but for your willingness to learn and to admit when you were wrong. A lot of people in your position would have let pride prevent them from changing course." Daniel felt emotion well up in his throat. "I learned from the best teacher I know. You've been showing me how to lead with integrity my entire life. I just needed to start paying attention." That evening, as the second shift took over production and the day workers headed home to their families, Margaret and Daniel walked through the plant together, observing the smooth operations and the positive atmosphere that had replaced the anxiety and uncertainty of just a few months earlier. "You know," Daniel said as they passed the area where the hydraulic incident had occurred, "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if that emergency hadn't forced me to reveal my identity." "You would have figured out another way," Margaret replied confidently, "because at heart, you're someone who cares more about doing the right thing than protecting yourself." "I hope so. I know so. After all, you're my son." As they reached the parking lot, Margaret looked back at the facility that had been her workplace for 18 years and was now the foundation of a new kind of family business, one that proved that success didn't require choosing between profitability and treating people with dignity. "Mom," Daniel said as they reached their cars, "thank you for not firing me when you found out I'd been lying to you for 2 weeks." Margaret laughed. "Daniel, I couldn't fire you. You own the company. You could have refused to work with me. You could have found another job. You could have made it impossible for me to succeed here. But then who would have taught you how to be a proper boss?" As they drove home separately, Both Margaret and Daniel understood that their story was no longer about a son deceiving his mother or an owner spying on his employees. It had become a story about two people learning to combine their different strengths to create something better than either could have achieved alone. The janitor's disguise was gone, but the lessons Daniel had learned while emptying trash cans and mopping floors would influence his leadership for the rest of his career. And Margaret had discovered that the young man she had raised to value hard work and integrity was ready to put those values into practice in ways that would benefit hundreds of families for years to come.